Hello and welcome back to Baby Elias's stories. We now return to Child 44 by Tom Rob Smith. Same day. Riza was relieved to be nearing the end of the day. She'd spent the past 8 hours teaching exactly the same lesson to all her year groups. Normally, she taught compulsory political studies, but this morning she received instructions posted to the school from the Ministry of Education ordering her to follow the enclosed lesson plan. It seems these instructions had been sent to every school in Moscow and were to be implemented with immediate effect. Ordinary lessons could resume tomorrow. The instructions stipulated that she spend the day discussing with each class how much Stalin loved his country's children. Love itself was a political lesson. There was no more important love than the leader's love, and consequently, one's love for the leader. As part of that love, Stalin wanted all of his children, no matter how old they were, to be reminded of certain basic precautions which they should make part of their daily life. They were not to cross roads without looking twice. They were to be careful when traveling on the metro. And finally, and this was to be emphasized particularly, they were not to play on the railway tracks. Over the past year, there had been several tragic accidents on the railways. The safety of the state's children was paramount. They were the future. Various faintly ridiculous demonstrations had been given. Each class had concluded with a short quiz to make sure all the information had been absorbed. Who loves you most? Correct answer, Stalin. Who do you love most? Correct answer, see above. Wrong answers to be logged. What should you never do? Correct answer, play on the railway tracks. Riza could only presume that the reason behind this latest edict was that the party was worried about population levels. As a rule, her classes were tiring, perhaps more so than other subjects. Whereas there was no expectation that students should clap the completion of every mathematical equation, there was an expectation that every pronouncement she made regarding Generalissimo, Stalin, the state of the Soviet Union, or the prospects for worldwide revolution be met with applause. Students were competitive with each other, none of them wanting to seem less dedicated than their neighbor. Every 5 minutes, the class would come to a halt as the children rose to their feet, stamping their shoes on the floor or banging their desks with their fists, and Riza was duty-bound to stand and join in. In order to stop her hands chafing, she clapped in a fashion whereby her palms would barely touch, gliding over each other in the imitation of enthusiasm. Initially, she'd suspected that the children enjoyed this raucous behavior and exploited any opportunity to interrupt the class. She'd come to realize this was not the case. They were afraid. Consequently, discipline was never a problem. She rarely needed to raise her voice and never made threats of any kind. Even from the age of 6, the children understood that to disrespect authority, to speak out of turn, was to take your life into your own hands. Youth provided no protection. The age at which a child could be shot for their crimes or their father's crimes was 12. That was a lesson Riza wasn't allowed to teach. Despite the large class sizes, which would have been larger still had it not been for the war playing havoc with demographics, she'd originally set out with the objective of remembering every student's name. Her intention had been to show that she cared about each student individually. Yet very quickly, she'd noticed her ability to recall names struck a peculiar note of unease. It was as though there were some implied menace. "If I can remember your name, I can denounce you." These children had already grasped the value of anonymity, and Reza had realized they'd prefer it if she paid them as little individual attention as possible. After less than 2 months, she'd stopped calling them by their names and reverted to pointing. Yet, comparatively, she had little reason to complain. The school she taught in, Secondary School 7, a rectangular building raised one stubby concrete leg-shaped to be one of the gems of the state education policy. Much photographed and publicized, it was opened by none other than Nikita Khrushchev, who'd made a speech in the new gymnasium, the floor of which had been waxed to such an extent that his bodyguards struggled not to sleep. He'd claim that education must be tailored to the country's needs, and what the country needed were highly productive, healthy young scientists, engineers, and Olympic gold medal winning athletes. The cathedral-sized gymnasium, adjacent to the main building, was wider and deeper than the school itself, equipped with an indoor running track, an array of mats, hoops, rope ladders, and springboards, all of which were put to good use by an extracurricular timetable that included an hour of training every day for every student regardless of age or ability. The implication of both his speech and design of the school itself had been always very clear to Reza. The country didn't need poets, philosophers, and priests. It needed productivity that could be measured and quantified, success that could be timed with a stopwatch. Reza counted only one friend amongst her colleagues, Ivan Kuzmich Zhukov, a language and literature teacher. She didn't know his exact age. He wouldn't say, but he was around about 40. Their friendship had occurred by chance. He'd casually lamented the size of the school library, a cupboard-like room in the basement next to the boiler stocked with pamphlets, back issues of Pravda, approved texts, and not a single foreign author. Hearing him, Reza had whispered that he should be more careful. That whisper had been the beginning of an unlikely friendship which, from her point of view, might have been strategically unwise, considering Ivan's tendency to speak his mind. He was, in many people's eyes, already a marked man. Other teachers were convinced that he had hoarded forbidden texts under his floorboards, or, far worse, he was writing a book of his own and smuggling the no doubt subversive pages out to the West. It was true that he'd loaned her an illegal translation of For Whom the Bell Tolls, which she'd been forced to read in parks over the summer and which she'd never dared take back to her apartment. Reza could afford the association only because her own loyalty had never been too closely scrutinized. She was, after all, the wife of a state security officer, a fact known by almost everyone, including some of the students. Logically, Ivan should have kept his distance. No doubt he reassured himself with the deduction that if Reza had wanted to denounce him, she would have done so already, considering how many imprudent things she'd heard him say and how easy it would for her to whisper his name across the pillow into the ear of her husband. So it came to be that the only person she trusted amongst the staff was the man most mistrusted, and the only person he trusted was the woman he should trust least of all. So it came to be that the only person she trusted amongst the staff was the man most mistrusted, and the only person he trusted was the woman he should trust least of all. He was married with 3 children. All the same, she suspected he was in love with her. It was not something she dwelt on, and she hoped for both their sakes that it was not something he dwelt on either. Outside the main entrance to the school, across the road in the foyer of a low-rise apartment block, stood Leo. He'd changed out of his uniform and was wearing civilian clothing he'd borrowed from work. In the Lubyanka, there were cupboards full of odds and ends, coats, jackets, trousers, all of various sizes and differing in quality, kept for exactly this purpose. Leo hadn't thought about where these clothes had come from until he'd found a spot of blood on the cuff of a cotton shirt. They were the clothes of those executed in the building on Varsonovyevsky Lane. Varsonovyevsky Lane. They'd been washed, of course, but some stains were stubborn. Dressed in an ankle-length grey woolen coat and a thick fur hat pulled down over his forehead, Leo was convinced his wife wouldn't recognize him if by chance she glanced in his direction. He stamped his feet to keep warm, checking his watch. A stainless steel Poljot aviator, a birthday present from his wife. There wasn't long until her classes were finished for the day. He glanced at the light above him. Using an abandoned mop, he reached up and smashed the bulb, plunging the foyer into shadow. This wasn't the first time his wife had been followed. 3 years ago, Leo had arranged surveillance for reasons that had nothing to do with whether or not she was a security risk. They'd been married less than a year. She'd become increasingly distant. They were living together, yet living apart, working long hours, glimpsing each other briefly in the morning and evening with as little interaction as 2 fishing boats, which set sail each day from the same port. He didn't believe that he'd changed as a husband, and so couldn't understand why she'd changed as a wife. Whenever he broached the subject, she'd claimed she felt unwell, yet she refused to see a doctor. And anyway, who was unwell month after month after month? The only explanation he could come up with was that she was in love with another man. Duly suspicious, he dispatched a newly recruited, promising young agent to follow his wife. This agent had done so every day for a week. Leo had justified this course of action because although unpleasant, it was motivated by love. However, it had been a risk, not merely in the sense that Riza might find out. If his colleagues had found out, they might have interpreted this matter differently. If Leo couldn't trust his wife sexually, how could they trust her politically? Unfaithful or not, subversive or not, it would be better for everyone if she was sent to the gulags, just to be sure. But Riza hadn't been having an affair, and no one ever found out about the surveillance. Relieved, he had accepted that he simply needed to be patient, attentive, and help her with whatever difficulty she was going through. Over the months, their relationship had gradually improved. Leo had transferred the young agent to a post in Leningrad, a move which he'd packaged as a promotion. This mission, however, was something entirely different. The order to investigate had come from above. This was official state business, a matter of national security. At stake was not their marriage, but their lives. There was no doubt in Leo's mind that Riza's name had been inserted into Anatoly Brodsky's confession by Vasily. The fact that another agent corroborated the details of the confession meant nothing. Either it was a conspiracy, a bare-faced lie, or Vasily had planted the name in Brodsky's head at some point during his interrogation. An easy enough thing to do. Leo blamed himself. Taking time off work had given Vasily an opportunity which he'd exploited with perfect ruthlessness. Leo was trapped. He couldn't claim the confession itself was a lie. It was an official document as valid and true as every other confession. The only course of action had been to register his profound disbelief, suggesting that the traitor Brodsky was trying to incriminate Riza as an act of revenge. The only course of action had been to register his profound disbelief, suggesting that the traitor Brodsky was trying to incriminate Riza as an act of revenge. Upon hearing this explanation, Kuzmin had asked how the traitor knew that he was married. Desperate, Leo had been forced to lie, claiming that he'd mentioned his wife's name in the course of their conversations. Leo was not a skillful liar. By defending his wife, he was incriminating himself. To stand up for someone was to stitch your fate into the lining of theirs. Kuzmin had concluded that such a potential breach of security would have to be thoroughly investigated. Either Leo could do it himself or allow another operative to take over. Hearing this ultimatum, he had accepted the case on the basis that he was simply trying to clear his wife's name. In much the same way that 3 years ago he put to bed his doubts about her faithfulness. Now he had to put to bed doubts about her faithfulness to the state. Across the road, children poured out of the school, breaking off in all directions. One young girl ran across the road, heading straight towards Leo and entering the apartment block where he was hiding. As she passed by in the gloom, her feet crunching on the shards of bulb glass, she paused, weighing up whether or not to speak. Leo turned to her. Leo turned to look at her. The girl had long black hair tied with a red band. She was perhaps 7 years old. Her cheeks were pink with the cold. Quite suddenly, he broke into a run. Quite suddenly, she broke into a run, her little shoes tapping up the flights of stairs, away from the stranger and back home where she was still young enough to believe she was safe. Leo moved to the glass door, watching as the last of the students filed out of the building. He knew Riza wasn't timetabled for any extracurricular activities. He knew Riza wasn't a timetable for any extracurricular activities. she'd be leaving soon. There she was, at the entrance, standing with a male colleague. He had a trim grey beard, round glasses. Leo noted that he was not an attractive man. He looked educated, cultivated, refined, with busy eyes and a satchel brimming with books. This must be Ivan. Riza had mentioned him, the language teacher. At a guess, Leo reckoned this man was older than him by at least 10 years. Leo willed them to separate at the gates, but instead they set off together, walking side by side in casual conversation. He waited, allowing them to get ahead. They were familiar with each other. Riza laughed at the joke and Ivan seemed pleased. Did Leo make her laugh? Not really, not often. He certainly didn't object to being laughed at when he was foolish or clumsy. He had a sense of humor in that regard, but no, he didn't tell jokes. Riza did. She was playful, verbally, intellectually. Ever since they'd first met, ever since she'd tricked him into believing she was called Lena, he'd never been in any doubt that she was smarter than him. Considering the risks associated with intellectual agility, he'd never been jealous. Until now, watching her with this man. Leo's feet were numb. He was glad to be on the move, trailing his wife at a distance of about 50 meters. In the weak orange glow of the street lights, it wasn't difficult to follow her. There were hardly any other people on the street. That changed when they turned on Avtozavodskaya, the main road, which was also the name of the metro station to which they were almost certainly heading. There were queues of people lined up outside grocery stores, clogging the pavements. Leo found it hard to keep track of his wife, made harder by her nondescript clothes. He had no choice but to shorten the distance between them, quickening his pace. He was less than 20 meters behind her. At this distance, there was a danger she'd see him. Riza and Ivan turned into Avtozavodskaya station, disappearing from view. Leo hurried forward, weaving in and out of the pedestrians. In the commuter crowds, she might easily disappear. This was, as Pravda frequently boasted, the busiest and best metro system in the world. Reaching the entrance to the station, he descended the stone steps to the lower hall, an opulent chamber, an ambassador's reception, with cream marble pillars, polished mahogany banisters illuminated by domes of frosted glass. Rush hour and not a centimeter of floor could be seen. Those thousands of people wrapped up in long coats and scarves hustled in line at the ticket barriers. Going against the flow, Leo backtracked up the steps, using this slight elevation to survey the heads of the crowd. Riza and Ivan had passed through the steel ticket barrier and were waiting for a place on the escalator. Leo rejoined the throng, sliding into gaps, edging forward. But stuck behind a mess of bodies had no option but to resort to less polite methods, using his hands to steer people aside. No one dared do anything more than look annoyed. No one knew who Leo might be. Reaching the ticket barrier, he was in time to see his wife move out of sight. He passed through, queuing and taking the first available position on the escalator. stretching down the flight of mechanical wooden steps in a diagonal line to the bottom were the tops of 100 winter hats. Stretching down the flight of mechanical wooden steps in a diagonal line to the bottom were the tops of 100 winter hats. Unable to distinguish one from the other, he leaned to the right. Riza was maybe 15 steps below him. In order to talk to Ivan, who was standing on the step behind and above her, she turned round and was facing upwards. Leo was in her line of view. He pulled back behind the man in front of him and, not wanting to risk another glance, waited until he was almost at the lower level before looking again. The passageway divided into two tunnels for trains traveling north and south, each filled with passengers, shuffling forward, trying to make their way onto the platforms, vying for a position on the next train. Leo couldn't see his wife anywhere. If Riza was en route home, she'd be heading 3 stops north on the Zamoskvoreskaya line. On the Zamoskvoreskaya line to Titralnaya, where she'd change. With no choice other than to suppose this was what she was doing, he moved down the platform, looking right and left, studying the faces lined up, crammed together, staring out in the same direction, waiting for the train. He was halfway down the platform. Riza wasn't here. Could she have taken a train in the other direction? Why would she go south? Suddenly, a man moved and Leo caught a glimpse of his satchel. There was Ivan. Riza was by his side, both of them standing by the platform's edge. Leo was so close he could almost reach out and touch her cheek. If she turned her head even a fraction, they'd be eye to eye. He was almost certainly in her peripheral vision. If she hadn't seen him, it was only because she wasn't expecting to see him. There was nothing he could do, nowhere to hide. He continued down the platform, waiting for her to call his name. He wouldn't be able to explain this as a coincidence. She'd see through his lie. She'd know he was following her. He counted 20 steps, then came to a stop by the edge of the platform, staring at the mosaic in front of him. 3 separate lines of sweat ran down the side of his face. He didn't dare wipe them away or turn to check in case she was looking in his direction. He tried to concentrate on the mosaic, a celebration of Soviet military strength. A tank with its barrel pointing straight out, flanked by heavy artillery and mounted by Russian soldiers in long sweeping coats, brandishing guns. Very slowly he turned his head. Riza was talking to Ivan. She hadn't seen him. A gust of warm air blew down the crowded platform. The train was approaching. As everyone turned to watch, Leo caught sight of a man looking in the opposite direction, away from the oncoming train, looking directly at him. It was the briefest of glances, eye contact for a fraction of a second. The man was maybe 30 years old. Leo had never seen him before, yet he knew immediately this man was a fellow Chekist, a state security operative. There was a second agent on the platform. The crowd surged forward, towards the train doors. The agent was gone, out of sight. The doors opened. Leo hadn't moved. His body was turned away from the train, still staring at the exact point where he'd seen those cool, professional eyes. Brushed aside by passengers disembarking, he recovered from his surprise and boarded the train. One carriage down from Riza. Who was that agent? Why did they need a second agent following his wife? Didn't they trust him? Of course they didn't. But he hadn't expected them to take such extreme supplementary measures. He pushed his way down towards the window, through which he'd be able to see into the adjoining carriage. He could see Riza's hand, holding the side bar. But there was no sign of this second agent. The doors were about to shut. The doors were about to shut. The second agent boarded the same carriage as Leo, slipping past him with apparent indifference and taking up position several meters away. He was well trained, calm, and had it not been for that brief glance, Leo might not have spotted him. This agent wasn't following Riza. He was following Leo. He should have guessed that this operation wouldn't have been left entirely in his hands. There was the possibility he was compromised. They might even suspect he was working with Riza if she was a spy. His superiors had an obligation to make sure he did his job properly. Anything he reported back would be cross-checked with the other agent. For this reason, it was essential that Riza go straight home. If she went anywhere else, the wrong restaurant or bookshop, the wrong home where the wrong people lived, she'd be putting herself at risk. Her only chance of escape, and it was a slim chance, was by saying nothing, doing nothing, meeting nobody. She could work, shop, and sleep. Any other activities were liable to be misconstrued. If Riza was traveling home, she'd remain on this train for the next 3 stops, reaching Teatralnaya station, where she changed to the Arbatsko-Pokrovskaya line and travel eastwards. Leo checked on the officer following him. Someone had stood to disembark, and the agent slipped into a vacant seat. He was now casually staring out of the window, no doubt studiously watching Leo out of the corner of his eye. The agent knew he'd been sighted. Perhaps that had even been his intention. None of it mattered as long as Riza went straight home. The train pulled into the second station, Novokuznetskaya. One more stop till they changed. The doors opened. Leo watched as Ivan disembarked. He thought, "Please stay on the train." Riza got off the train, stepping down onto the platform and making her way towards the exit. She wasn't going home. Leo didn't know where she was going. To follow her would expose her to the scrutiny of the second agent. Not to follow her would put his life in jeopardy. He had to choose. Leo turned his head. The agent hadn't moved. From that position, he couldn't have seen Riza get off the train. He was taking his cue from Leo, not Riza, presuming that the movements of the two were synchronized. The doors were about to shut. Leo stayed where he was. Leo glanced to the side, through the window, as though Riza was still in the adjoining carriage, as though he was still checking on her. What was he doing? It had been an impulsive, reckless decision. His plan depended on the agent believing that his wife was on the train. A rickety plan at best. Leo hadn't counted on the crowds. Riza and Ivan were still on the platform, moving towards the exit with excruciating slowness. Since the agent was staring out the window, he'd seen them as soon as the train began to move. Riza edged closer to the exit, queuing patiently. She was in no hurry. She had no reason to be, unaware that both her life and Leo's were in danger unless she moved out of sight. The train began to roll forward. Their carriage was almost in line with the exit. The agent would see Riza for sure. He'd know that Leo had deliberately failed. The train picked up speed. It was parallel to the exit. Riza was standing in plain view. Leo felt the blood rush from his stomach. He slowly turned his head to see the agent's reaction. A sturdy, middle-aged man and his sturdy, middle-aged wife were standing in the aisle, blocking any view the agent might have of the platform. The train rattled into the tunnel. He hadn't seen Riza at the exit. He didn't know Riza was no longer on the train. Barely able to conceal his relief, Leo resumed his pantomime of staring into the adjoining carriage. At Teatral Naya station, Leo waited for as long as possible before getting off the train, acting as though he was still following his wife, as though she was heading home. He moved towards the exit, glancing back as he saw that the agent had also disembarked and was trying to catch up some of the ground between them. Leo pressed forward. The passage funneled out into a thoroughfare with access either to the different lines or to the street-level exit. He had to lose this tale without appearing to do so. The tunnel to the right would take him to trains traveling east on the Arbatsko-Pokrovskaya line. The route home. Leo turned right. Much depended upon the arrival of the next train. If he could get far enough ahead, then he might be able to board the train before the agent caught up and realized Riza wasn't on the platform. Now, in the tunnel, which led to the platform, he was faced with crowds of people in front of him. Suddenly, he heard the sound of an approaching train pulling into the platform. There was no way he could reach it in time. Not with all these people in front of him. He reached into his jack pocket, taking out his state security identity card and tapping it on the shoulder of the man in front of him. As though scalded, the man stepped aside. The woman stepped aside. The crowd parted. With a clear path, he was able to hurry forward. The train was there. Its doors open, ready to go. He put his card away and boarded. He turned to see how close his tail was. If the man managed to catch up and board this train, the game was up. The people who'd moved out of the way had closed ranks. The agent was stuck behind them, resorting to less subtle methods, pushing and shoving people out of the way. He was catching up. Why weren't the doors closing? The agent was now at the platform, only meters away. The doors began to close. His hand darted out, grabbing the side of the door, but the mechanism wouldn't be pulled back, and the man, who Leo saw closely for the first time, had no choice but to let go. Maintaining an air of casual indifference, Leo tried not to react, watching out of the corner of his eyes as the agent was left behind. In the darkness of the tunnel, Leo took off his sweat-sodden hat. Same day. The elevator came to a stop on the 5th floor, the top floor. The doors opened, and Leo stepped out into the narrow corridor. The hallway smelled of cooking. It was 7 in the evening, the time at which many families ate uzhin, the last meal of the day. As he walked past the apartments, he could hear the sound of dinner preparations through the thin plywood front doors. The closer he got to his parents' apartment, the more tired he felt. He'd spent several hours crisscrossing the city. After losing the agent following him at Teatralnaya station, he'd returned home to apartment 124. Turning on the lights and radio, drawing the curtains. A necessary precaution, even though they were on the 14th floor. He'd left again, taking a deliberately circuitous route to the metro and traveling back into the city. He hadn't changed his clothes, and he regretted not doing so. They'd become unpleasant. His shirt, drenched with sweat, had dried and stuck to his back. He was sure it stank, although he couldn't smell it himself. He brushed these concerns aside. His parents wouldn't care. They'd be too distracted by the fact he was asking their advice, something he hadn't done in a long time. The balance of their relationship had shifted. He now helped them far more than they helped him. Leo liked it that way. He enjoyed the feeling of being able to secure them easy jobs at their places of work. With nothing more than a polite inquiry, his father had become a foreman at the munitions factory, taken off the assembly line, while his mother, who spent her days stitching parachutes, had been given a similar rise in status. He'd improved their access to food. No longer did they have to queue for several hours for basics such as bread and buckwheat. Instead, they were given access to the spetstorgi, the special shops not intended for the general public. In these restricted shops, there were exotic delights such as fresh fish, saffron, and even slabs of real dark chocolate, instead of the synthetic kind, which substituted cocoa with a blend of rye, barley, wheat, and peas. If his parents had trouble with a quarrelsome neighbor, that neighbor never remained quarrelsome for long. There was no violence involved, no crude threats, just a hint that they were dealing with a family better connected than their own. The apartment he'd managed to have them allocated was in a pleasant residential area in the north of the city. A low-rise block where each apartment could boast of private washroom facilities and its own small balcony overlooking a small stretch of grass and a quiet road. They shared it with no one. Extraordinary in the city. After 50 years of hardship, they finally enjoyed a privileged life, a fact his parents keenly appreciated. They'd become addicted to comfort, and it all hung by the thread of Leo's career. Leo knocked on the door. When his mother, Anna, opened the door, she seemed surprised. That surprise, which rendered her briefly speechless, melted away. She stepped forward, hugging her son, speaking excitedly. "Why didn't you tell us you were coming? We heard you were ill. We came over to see you, but you were asleep. Raisa let us in. We looked in on you. I even held your hand, but what could we do? You needed your rest. You were sleeping like a child. Raisa told me you came around. Raisa told me you came round. Thank you for the fruit, the oranges and the lemons. We didn't bring any fruit. At least I don't think we did. I'm getting old. Maybe we did. Having heard the conversation, his father, Stepan, appeared from the kitchen, gently nudging past his wife. She'd gained a little weight recently. They both gained a little weight. They looked well. Stepan embraced his son. Are you better? Yes, much. That's good. We were worried about you. How's your back? It hasn't hurt for a while now. One of the benefits of an administrative job. All I do is oversee other people's hard work. I walk around with a pen and a clipboard. Enough with the guilt. You've done your time. Perhaps, but people look at you differently when you're no longer one of them. My friends are not quite so friendly anymore. If someone is late, I am the one who has to report them. Thankfully, no one has been late so far. Leo rolled these words around his head. What would you do if they were late? Would you report them? I just keep telling them every evening, don't be late. No, in other words, his father would not report them. He'd probably already overlooked a couple of cases. Right now wasn't the time to warn him. But that kind of generosity was liable to be found out. In the kitchen, a head of cabbage was bubbling in a copper pot of water. His parents were in the middle of preparing golubsti, and Leo told them to carry on. They could talk in the kitchen. He stood back and watched as his father mixed together mince, fresh meat, not dried, possibly only because of Leo's job. Fresh grated carrots, once again possible only because of him, and cooked rice. His mother set about peeling the color-drained leaves from the cooked cabbage head. His parents knew something was wrong and waited, without prompting, for Leo to begin. He was glad they were busy with the food. We've never spoken much about my work. That's for the best. There have been times when I've found my job difficult. I've done things of which I'm not proud, but which were always necessary. Leo paused, trying to work out how best to proceed. He asked, have any of your acquaintances been arrested? The question was awkward. Leo appreciated that. Stepan and Anna glanced at each other before carrying on with the food. No doubt glad to have something to do. Anna shrugged. Everyone knows someone who's been arrested, but we don't question it. I say to myself, you officers are the ones with the evidence. I know only what I see of people, and it is very easy to appear to be nice and normal and loyal. It is your job to see past that. You know what's best for this country. It is not for people like us to judge. Leo nodded, adding, this country has many enemies. Our revolution is hated around the world. We must protect it. Unfortunately, even from ourselves. He paused. He hadn't come here to repeat state rhetoric. His parents stopped working, turning to face their son, their fingers sticky with oils from the mince. Yesterday, I was asked to denounce Raisa. My superior officers believe she's a traitor. They believe she's a spy working for a foreign agency. I've been ordered to investigate. A single drop of oil dripped from Stepan's finger onto the floor. He stared at the drop of grease and then asked, "Is she a traitor?" "Father, she's a school teacher. She works, she comes home. She works, she comes home." "Then tell them that. Is there any evidence? Why do they even think such a thing?" "There's a confession of an executed spy. He named her. He claimed he worked with her. But I know that confession is a lie. I know that the spy was in reality nothing more than a vet. We made a mistake in arresting him. I believe his confession to be the fabrication of another officer trying to implicate me. I know my wife is innocent. The whole thing is an act of revenge." Stepan wiped his hands clean on Anna's apron. "Tell them the truth. Make them listen. Expose this officer. You are in a position of authority." "This confession, whether fabricated or not, has been accepted as the truth. It's an official document and her name is on it. If I defend Riza, I'm contesting the validity of a state document. If they admit one is flawed, then they admit all of them are. They cannot go back. The repercussions would be enormous. It would mean all confessions were up for question." "Can you not say that this vet was mistaken?" "Yes, that is what I intend to do. But if I make a case and they don't believe me, then not only will they arrest her, they will arrest me too. If she is guilty and I've claimed she's innocent, then I am guilty too. That isn't all. I know how these matters play out. There's a very strong chance that they will arrest both of you. Part of the judicial code targets any family members of a convicted criminal. We are guilty by association." "And if you denounce her?" "I don't know." "Yes, you do." "We'll survive. She won't." The water was still bubbling on the stove. At last, Stepan spoke. "You're here because you're unsure what to do. You're here because you're a good man and you want us to tell you to do the right thing, the decent thing. You want us to give you the right advice, which would be to tell them that they're wrong, to tell them that Riza is innocent, and to brave the consequences that come from that." "Yes." Stepan nodded, looking at Anna. After a moment, he added, "But I can't give you that advice. And I'm not sure you believe I would give you that advice. How can I? The truth is, I want my wife to leave. I want my son to leave. And I want to leave. I would do whatever it takes to ensure that. As I understand the situation, it is one life for 3. I'm sorry. I know that you expected more of me. But we're old, Leo. We wouldn't survive the gulags. We'd be separated. We'd die alone." "And if you were young, what your advice be then?" Stepan nodded. "You're right. My advice would be the same. But don't be angry with me. What did you expect when you came here? Did you expect us to say, fine, we don't mind dying? And what purpose would our death serve? Would your wife be saved? Would you live happily together? If that had been the case, I would gladly have given up my life for the 2 of you. But that isn't what would happen. All that would happen is that we'd die. All of us. All 4 of us. But you'd die knowing that you'd done the right thing." Leo looked at his mother. Her face was as pale as the lank cabbage leaves she'd held in her hand. She was quite calm. She didn't contradict Stepan. asking instead, "When do you have to decide?" "I have 2 days to gather evidence. Then I must report back." His parents continued with the preparations of dinner, wrapping mince in the cabbage leaves, laying them side by side in a baking tray like a row of thick, dismembered thumbs. No one spoke until the tray was full. Stepan asked, "You'll eat with us?" Following his mother into the living room, Leo saw that there were already 3 place settings. "You're expecting a guest?" "We're expecting Riza." "My wife?" "She's coming for dinner. When you knocked on the door, we thought you were her." Anna laid a 4th plate on the table, explaining, "She comes almost every week. She didn't want you to know how lonely she finds it, eating with only the radio for company. We've become very fond of her." It was true that Leo was never home from work at 7. A culture of long working days had been fostered by Stalin, an insomniac, who would take no more than 4 hours of sleep a night. Leo had heard that no one in the Politburo was permitted to leave until the lights of Stalin's study were turned off, normally sometime past midnight. Though this rule didn't apply exactly to the Lubyanka, similar levels of dedication were expected. Few officers worked anything less than 10 hours days. Few officers worked anything less than 10-hour days, even if several of those hours were spent doing nothing at all. There was a knock. Stepan opened the door, allowing Riza into the hallway. She was as surprised as his parents to see Leo. Stepan explained, "He was working nearby. For once we can eat together as a family." She undid her jacket, which Stepan took from her. She stepped forward, close to Leo, looking him up and down. "Whose clothes are these?" Leo glanced at the trousers, the shirt. "These dead men's clothes. I borrowed them from work." Riza leaned closer, whispering in Leo's ear, "The shirt smells." Leo moved towards the bathroom. At the door he glanced back, watching as Riza helped his parents with the table. Leo had grown up without running hot water. His parents had shared their old apartment with his father's uncle and his family. There had been only 2 bedrooms, 1 bedroom for each family. The apartment had no inside toilet or bathroom. The occupants of the building had to use outdoor facilities which were without hot water. In the morning, the queues were long, and in the winter, snow would fall on them while they waited. A private sink full of hot water would have been an impossible luxury, a dream. Leo stripped off the shirt, washing himself. Finished, he opened the door, asking his father if they could borrow his shirt. Though his father's body was work-worn, stooped, and shaped by the assembly line as surely as the tank shells that had been shaped by him, he was of a roughly similar frame to his son, a strong build with broad muscular shoulders. The shirt was a close enough fit. Changed, Leo sat down to eat, while the golubsti finished baking in the oven. They had zakuski, plates of pickles, mushroom salad, and for each of them a thin slice of veal tongue cooked with marjoram, left to cool in gelatin and served with horseradish. It was an exceptionally generous spread. Leo couldn't help but stare at it, calculating the cost of each dish. Whose death had paid for that marjoram? Had that slice of tongue been bought with Anatoly Brodsky's life? Feeling sick, he remarked. I can see why you come here every week, Riza smiled. Yes, they spoil me. I tell them Kasha would be fine, but Stepan interjected. It's an excuse to spoil ourselves. Trying to sound casual, Leo asked his wife. You come here straight after work? That's right. That was a lie. She'd gone somewhere with Ivan first. But before Leo could consider it further, Riza corrected herself. That's not true. Normally I come here straight after work, but tonight I had an appointment, which is why I'm a little late. An appointment? With the doctor? Riza began to smile. I'd meant to tell you when we were on our own, but since it has come up... Tell me what? Anna stood up. Would you like us to leave? Leo gestured for his mother to be seated. Please, we're family. No secrets. I'm pregnant. 20 February. Leo couldn't sleep. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the slow breathing of his wife, her back pressed against his side, not out of any deliberate expression of intimacy, but through chance movements. She was an unsettled sleeper. Was that enough reason to denounce her? He knew it was. He knew how it could be written up. Unable to rest easy, troubled by her dreams, my wife is clearly tormented by some secret. He could pass responsibility for the investigation to another person. He could kid himself that he was deferring judgment. He was too close, too involved. But any such investigation would only come to one conclusion. The case had been opened. No one else would position against the presumption of guilt. Leo got out of bed and stood by the living room window, which had a view not of the city, but of the apartment block opposite. A wall of windows with only 3 lights on. 3 out of 1,000 or so. And he wondered what worries were troubling the occupants. What was keeping them from sleeping? He felt an odd kind of companionship with those 3 squares of pale yellow light. It was 4 in the morning. A resting hour. The best time to seize a person, to grab them from their sleep. They were vulnerable, disorientated. Unguarded comments made as officers swarmed into their homes were often used against suspects in their interrogations. It was not easy to be prudent when your wife was being dragged across the floor by her hair. How many times had Leo smashed the door open with the sole of his boot? How many times had he watched as a married couple were pulled from their bed, flashlights shone in their eyes and up their nightclothes? How many times had he heard the sound of an officer laughing at the sight of someone's genitals? How many people had he pulled from their beds? How many apartments had he torn apart? And what of the children he'd held back as the parents were taken away? He couldn't remember. He'd blocked it out. The names, the faces. An indistinct memory served him well. Had he cultivated it? Had he taken amphetamines, not to work longer hours, but to erode the memories of that work? There was a joke, popular among officers. who could tell it with impunity. A man and his wife were asleep in bed when they were woken by a sharp knock on the door. Fearing the worst, they got up, kissed each other goodbye. "I love you, wife. I love you, husband." Having said their goodbyes, they opened the front door. Standing before them was a frantic neighbor, a corridor full of smoke and flames as high as the ceiling. The man and his wife smiled with relief and thanked God. It was just the building on fire. Leo had heard variations on this joke. Instead of a fire, they were armed bandits. Instead of armed bandits, there was a doctor with terrible news. In the past, he'd laughed, confident that it would never happen to him. His wife was pregnant. Did that fact change anything? It might change the attitude of his superiors to Riza. They'd never liked her. She'd never given Leo any children. In these times it was expected, demanded that couples have children. After the millions who died fighting, children were a social obligation. Why had Riza not become pregnant? The question had dogged their marriage. The only conclusion was that there was something wrong with her. The pressure had been cranked up recently. Questions asked with greater frequency. Riza was seeing a doctor regularly in order to address the issue. Their sexual relations were pragmatic, motivated by external pressures. The irony didn't escape Leo that just as his superiors got what they wanted, Riza pregnant, they wanted her dead. Perhaps he could mention that she was pregnant. He dismissed the idea. A traitor was traitor. There was no exonerating circumstances. Leo showered. The water was cold. He got changed and made a breakfast of oatmeal. He had no desire to eat and watched it harden in the bowl. Riza entered the kitchen, sat down, rubbing the sleep out of her eyes. He got up. Neither of them spoke as he waited for the oatmeal to warm up. He put a bowl before her. She said nothing. He made a glass of weak tea, placed it on the table alongside the jar of jam. "I'll try to be home a little earlier." "You don't have to change your routine for me." "I'll try anyway." "Leo, you don't have to change your routine for me." Leo shut the front door. It was dawn. From the edge of the walkway, he could see people waiting for the tramcar hundreds of meters down below. He made his way to the elevator. Once it had arrived, he pressed the button for the top floor. On the 13th floor, the top floor, he stepped out and walked down the passageway to the service door at the end marked "No Entry." The lock had been smashed a long time ago. It led to a flight of stairs that in turn led to the roof. He'd been here before, when they'd first moved in. Facing west, you could see the city. Facing east, you could see the edge of the countryside, where Moscow broke apart and gave way to snow-covered fields. 4 years ago, admiring this view, he thought himself one of the luckiest men alive. He was a hero. He had the newspaper clipping to prove it. He had a powerful job, a beautiful wife. His faith in the state had been unquestioning. Did he miss that feeling? Complete, unswerving confidence. Yes, he did. He took the elevator down to the 14th floor, returning to his apartment. Riza had gone to work. Her breakfast bowl sat unwashed in the kitchen. He took off his jacket and boots, warmed his hands, ready to begin his search. Leo had organized and overseen the searches of many houses, apartments and offices. They were treated competitively by those who worked in the MGB. Stories were swapped about the extraordinary thoroughness which officers demonstrated in order to prove their dedication. Precious objects were smashed, portraits and works of art cut from the frames, books ripped apart, entire walls knocked down. Even though this was his home and these were his things, Leo proposed to treat this search no differently. He ripped off the bed linen, pillowcases and sheets, turning the mattress upside down and feeling it carefully. Every square inch like a blind man reading Braille. Paper documents could be stitched into a mattress, becoming invisible to the eye. The only way to locate these secret stashes was by touch. Finding nothing, he moved to the shelves. He went through every book, checking if anything had been placed inside them. He found 100 rubles, just under a week's wages. He looked at the money, wondering what it could mean, until remembering that the book belonged to him and this money was his own, a secret stash. Another agent might have declared it proof that the owner was a speculator. Leo put the money back. He opened the drawers, looking down at Riza's neatly folded clothes. He picked up each garment, feeling and shaking it before dropping it in a heap on the floor. When all the drawers were emptied, he checked the backs and sides. Finding nothing, he turned, studying the room. He pressed himself against the walls, running his fingers along them to see if there was the outline of a safe or a hollow. He took down the framed newspaper clipping, the photo of himself beside the burning Panzer tank. It was peculiar to think of that moment, surrounded by death, as happier times. He took the frame apart. The slip of newspaper floated to the floor. Putting the clipping and the frame back together, he turned the bed on its side, leaning it against the wall. He got onto his knees. The floorboards were securely screwed down. He retrieved a screwdriver from the kitchen and took up every floorboard. Underneath there was nothing but dust and pipes. He went into the kitchen, washed the dirt off his hands. There was, at last, warm water. He spent a leisurely amount of time lathering the small bar of soap, scrubbing his skin even after all the dirt had gone. What was he trying to wash off his hands? The betrayal? No. He had no interest in metaphors. He was washing his hands because they were dirty. He was searching his apartment because it had to be done. He mustn't overthink. There was a knock on the front door. He rinsed his hands, which were covered from wrist to elbow in cream-colored soap spuds. There was a second knock. With water dripping from his arms, he moved into the hallway, calling out, "Who is it?" "It's Vasily." Leo closed his eyes, feeling his heart rate quicken and trying to control the surge of anger. Vasily knocked again. Leo stepped forward, opening the door. Vasily was accompanied by two men. The first was a young officer Leo didn't recognize. He had soft features and paper-pale skin. He stared at Leo with expressionless eyes, like two glass marbles pushed into a bowl of dough. The second officer was Fyodor Andreev. Vasily had selected these men carefully. The man with the pale skin was his protection, no doubt strong, a good shot or quick with a knife. He'd brought Fyodor along for spite. "What is it?" "We're here to help. Major Kuzmin sent us." "Thank you, but I have the investigation under control." "I'm sure you do. We're here to assist." "Thank you, but that's not necessary." "Come on, Leo. We've traveled a long way, and it's cold out here." Leo stepped aside, letting them in. None of the three men took off their boots, which were encrusted with ice, chunks of which dropped from their soles, melting into the carpet. Leo shut the door, aware that Vasily was here to bait him. He wanted Leo to lose his temper. He wanted an argument, an ill-considered comment, anything to strengthen his case. Leo offered his guests tea or vodka if they preferred. Vasily's love drink was well known, but it was considered the most minor of vices, if a vice at all. He dismissed Leo's offer with a shake of his head and glanced into the bedroom. "What have you found?" Without waiting for a reply, Vasily entered the room staring at the upturned mattress. "You've not even cut it open!" He leant down, drawing his knife, ready to slice open the mattress. Leo caught hold of his hand. "There's a way to feel for items stitched into the material. You don't have to cut it." "So you're going to put the place back together again?" "That's right." "You still think your wife is innocent?" "I've found nothing to suggest otherwise." "May I give you some advice?" "Find another wife. Riza is beautiful, but there are many beautiful women. Maybe you'd be better off with one who wasn't quite so beautiful." Vasily reached into his pocket, pulling out a set of folded photographs. He offered them to Leo. They were photographs taken of Riza outside the school with Ivan, the literature teacher. "She's fucking him, Leo. She's a traitor to you and the state." "These were taken at the school. They're both teachers. Of course it's possible to take photographs of them together. It proves nothing." "Do you know his name?" "Ivan, I think. We've had an eye on him for some time. We have our eye on lots of people." "Perhaps you're a friend of his also?" "I've never met him. I've never spoken to him." Seeing the heaps of clothes on the floor, Vasily bent down and picked up a pair of Riza's underpants. He rubbed them between his fingers, crumpled them into a ball, placing them under his nose and never taking his eyes off Leo. Instead of feeling anger at this provocation, Leo contemplated his deputy in a way that he'd never bothered to before. Who exactly was this man who hated him so much? Was he motivated? Was he motivated by professional jealousy or by raw ambition? Watching him now, sniffing Riza's clothes, Leo realized there was something personal about this hatred. "May I take a look around the rest of your apartment?" Fearing a trap of some kind, Leo replied, "I'll come with you." "No, I'd prefer to do it by myself." Leo nodded. Vasily moved off. Hardly able to breathe, his throat constricted with anger, Leo stared at the upturned bed. He was surprised by a soft voice beside him. It was Fyodor. "You do all this? Search through your wife's clothes, turn your bed upside down, rip up your own floorboards, pull your own life apart." We should all be prepared to submit to such searches. Generalissimo Stalin, I've heard this too. Our leader said even his apartment could be searched if need be. Not only can we all be investigated, we must all be investigated. And yet, you would not investigate the death of my son. You would investigate your wife yourself, your friends, your neighbors, but you would not take a look at his body. You would not spare an hour to see how his stomach was cut open, how he died with dirt shoved in his mouth. Fyodor was calm, his voice soft. His anger was no longer raw. It had turned to ice. He could speak in this fashion to Leo, openly, frankly, because he knew Leo was no longer a threat. Fyodor, you didn't see this body either. Fyodor, you didn't see his body either. I spoke to the old man who found his body. He told me what he saw. I saw in the old man's eyes his shock. I spoke to the eyewitness, the woman you scared away. A man was holding my son's hand, leading him along the tracks. She saw that man's face. She could describe him. But no one wants her to speak, and now she's too afraid to. My boy was murdered, Leo. The militia made all the witnesses change their statements. This I expected. But you were my friend, and you came to my home and instructed my family to keep our mouths shut. You threatened a grieving family. You read us a fiction and told us to commit those lies to our hearts. Instead of looking for the person who killed my son, you placed the funeral under scrutiny instead. Fyodor, I was trying to help you. I believe you. You were telling us the way to survive. Yes. And in some ways I'm grateful. Otherwise, the man who murdered my son would also have murdered me and my family. You saved us. That is why I'm here. Not to gloat, but to return the favor. Vasily is right. You must sacrifice your wife. Don't bother looking for any evidence. Denounce her and you'll survive. Riza is a spy. It's been decided. I've read Anatoly Brodsky's confession. It's written in the same black ink as my son's incident report. No, Fyodor was wrong. He was angry. Leo reminded himself that he had a simple objective: to investigate his wife and report his findings. His wife was innocent. I'm convinced the traitor's remarks concerning my wife were motivated by revenge and nothing more. So far, my investigation supports that. Vasily had re-entered the room. It was impossible to tell how much of their conversation he'd heard. He answered, except that the other 6 names he listed have all been arrested, and all 6 have already confessed. Anatoly Brodsky's information has proved invaluable. Then I am pleased I was the one who apprehended him. Your wife was named by a convicted spy. I've read his confession, and Riza's name is the last on the list. The names weren't given in order of importance. I believe he added it out of spite. I believe he wanted to hurt me personally. It is unlikely to fool anyone. An obvious, desperate trick. You're welcome to help with my search, if that is why you've come round. As you can see, Leo gestured at the ripped-up floorboards. I've been thorough. Give her up, Leo. You need to be realistic. On the one hand, you have your career, your parents. On the other hand, you have a traitor and a slut. Leo glanced at Fyodor. His face showed no sign of pleasure, no malicious relish. Vasily continued. You know she's a slut. That is why you had her followed before. Leo's anger was displaced by shock. They'd known all along. Did you think that was a secret? We all know. Denounce her, Leo. End this. End the doubt. End the niggling questions at the back of your mind. Give her up. We'll go drinking together afterwards. By the end of the night, you'll have another woman. I'll report my findings tomorrow. If Riza is a traitor, I'll say so. If she's not, I'll say so. Then I wish you luck, comrade. If you survive this scandal, you'll one day be running the MGB. I'm sure of it. And it would be an honor to work under you. At the front door, Vasily turned. Remember what I said. Your life and the lives of your parents are being weighed against hers. It's not a difficult decision. Leo shut the door. Bang! Listening to them walk away, he noticed his hands were shaking. He returned to the bedroom, surveying the mess. He replaced all the floorboards, screwing them back down. He made the bed, carefully straightening all the sheets and then crumpling them slightly in imitation of how he'd found them. He replaced all Riza's clothes, folding and stacking them, conscious that he couldn't remember the exact order in which he'd pulled them out. An approximation would have to do. As he lifted a cotton shirt, a small object fell out, hitting his foot and rolling onto the floor. Leo bent down and picked it up. It was a copper ruble coin. He tossed it onto the top of his bedside cabinet. On impact, the coin split in two, the separate halves rolling off opposite sides of the cabinet. Perplexed, he approached the cabinet. He knelt down and retrieved the two halves. The inside of one had been hollowed out. When slotted together, it looked like an ordinary coin. Leo had seen one of these before. It was a device for smuggling microfilm. 21 February. Present at Leo's disposition were Major Kuzmin, Vasily Nikitin, and Timur Rafaelovich, the officer who'd taken Leo's place during Anatoly Brodsky's interrogation. Leo knew him only in passing, an ambitious man of few words and much credibility. The discovery that Rafaelovich was prepared to vouch for everything in the confession, including the reference to Riza, was devastating. This man was no lackey of Vasily. Rafaelovich didn't respect or fear him. Leo wondered whether Vasily could have inserted Riza's name into the confession. He had no sway over Rafaelovich, no leverage, and according to their rank, he would have been the subordinate officer during the interrogation. For the past 2 days, Leo had been working under the assumption that this had been an act of revenge by Vasily. He'd been mistaken. Vasily wasn't behind this. The only person who could have organized the fabrication of such a confession backed up with such a high-ranking witness was Major Kuzmin. It was a setup, orchestrated by none other than his mentor, the man who'd taken Leo under his wing. Leo had ignored his advice regarding Anatoly Brodsky, and now he was being taught a lesson. What had Kuzmin told him? Sentimentality can blind a man. This was a test, an exercise. The issue under scrutiny here was Leo's suitability as an officer. It had nothing to do with Riza, nothing at all. Why appoint the husband of a suspect to investigate his wife unless the primary concern was how the husband would conduct himself during that investigation? Hadn't Leo been the one who'd been followed? Hadn't Vasily come to check whether he was searching the apartment properly? He wasn't interested in the contents of the apartment. He was interested in Leo's approach. It all made sense. Vasily had goaded him yesterday, told him to denounce his wife, precisely because he hoped that Leo would do exactly the opposite and stand up for her. He didn't want Leo to denounce Raisa. He didn't want him to pass this test. He wanted him to put his private life above. He wanted him to put his private life above the party. It was a trick. All he had to do was show Major Kuzmin that he was willing to denounce his wife, prove that his loyalties were absolutely with the MGB, prove his faith was unquestioning, prove that his heart could be cruel. If he did this, then they'd all be safe. Raisa, his unborn child, his parents, his future with the MGB would be assured, and Vasily would be on irrelevance. Yet, wasn't this a presumption? What if the traitor was, as he'd confessed to being, a traitor? What if he'd somehow been working with Raisa? Perhaps he'd spoken the truth. Why was Leo so sure that this man was innocent? Why was he so sure his wife was innocent? After all, why did she befriend a dissident literature teacher? What was that coin doing in their apartment? Hadn't the 6 other names listed in the confession been arrested and all been successfully interrogated? The list was proven, and Raisa was on the list. Yes, she was a spy, and here in his pocket was the copper coin, the evidence to prove it. He could place the coin on the desk and recommend that both she and Ivan Zhukov be taken in for questioning. He'd been played a fool. Vasily was right. She was a traitor. She was pregnant with another man's child. Hadn't he always known that she'd been unfaithful to him? She didn't love him. She was sure of that. He was sure of that. Why risk everything for her? A woman who was cold to him. A woman who at best tolerated him. She was a threat to everything he'd worked for. Everything he'd won for his parents and for himself. She was a threat to the country. A country Leo had fought to defend. It was quite clear. If Leo said she was guilty, then this would end well for both him and his parents. That was guaranteed. It was the only safe thing to do. If this was a test of Leo's character, then Raisa would also be spared, and she would never need to know. If she was a spy, then these men already had the evidence and were waiting to see if Leo was working with her. If she was a spy, then he should denounce her. She deserved to die. The only course of action was to denounce his wife. Major Kuzmin began the proceedings. Leo Stepanovich, we have reason to believe your wife is working for foreign agencies. You personally are not suspected of any crimes. This is the reason we've asked you to investigate the allegations. Please tell us what you have found. Leo had the confirmation he was looking for. Major Kuzmin's offer was clear. If he denounced his wife, he'd have their continued confidence. What had Vasily said? If you survive this scandal, you'll one day be running the MGB. I'm sure of it. Promotion was a sentence away. The room was silent. Major Kuzmin leaned forward. Leo? Leo stood up, straightened the jacket of his uniform. My wife is innocent.